Michigan. Carl was an extraordinary senator and an extraordinary person. I remember after I'd been in the Senate a few years, my friends back home said, well, who are the real stars of the United States Senate? And there were many who were just as obvious as can be, Ted Kennedy, for example. But I said there were two you probably don't know much about that I would turn to time and again if I had to make an important decision, either policy or politics. And I know I would get a thoughtful, intelligent response. One was Paul Sarbanes of Maryland, and the other was Carl Levin of Michigan. Those two, more than many of the colleagues that I've served with, really represented the best of the United States Senate. Carl Levin was brilliant, nothing short of brilliant, and he was my friend. Many times we sat together and I'd talk to him and I reflected on the way he approached legislation. Many of us think about the big picture items and leave the details to staff, not Carl. Somebody would bring an amendment to the floor and Carl would say, I'd like to get a copy of that. That in itself is unusual. We usually trust our staff to look at copies of amendments. And then he would say, as he read the amendment, can I take this home tonight and read it and tell you what I think about it in the morning? And you knew that that wasn't a pose. That was the fact. Carl took his job that seriously. He served in the Senate and represented his beloved state of Michigan for 36 years. When he retired in 2014, he left a legacy in the Senate, certainly of important and good legislation, but more importantly, of the image of a real senator. He left a powerful example of what we can achieve in life and in politics when we choose integrity over ideology and common good over confrontation. His keen intellect, his honesty and fair-mindedness, decency and unfailing civility earned him the respect of senators on both sides of the aisle. The list of laws that he can claim to have authored is long and historic. If you knew his background, you understood where this man came from and what made him what he was in the Senate. First and foremost, he was a son of Detroit, Michigan. He showed up in Washington in 1979. He was driving a 1974 American-made Dodge Dart with a hole in the floorboard. He was still driving that car 10 years later. That's how devoted he was to the U.S. auto industry, its workers, and unions. He wasn't flashy. I don't think he owned a shirt of any other color than white. And when we'd go on the informal weekends with our families, he would be wearing a white shirt, which he'd roll the cuffs up on to really let his hair down and be informal. He was just that humble a man. But when General Motors and Chrysler faced potential collapse in 2008, he knew what he had to do. He pressed Congress and the new president to support those companies with billions of dollars in loans, and thank God he did. He saved jobs and saved companies that are still major players in the industry. By the time he retired 6 years later, the loans to those companies had been paid off and the companies were earning record profits. His work on the Senate Armed Services Committee is known to all. 36 years he served on that committee. He was the champion of Americans' military and military families and veterans, and one of the Congress's most respected voices on national security and military issues. He voted for the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell when it was a far from popular thing to do anywhere. And he voted against the war in Iraq. I felt honored to be joining him in that vote. He and I were two of only 23 senators who voted no on that sadly misguided war. And I will tell you for sure that before I made a final decision, I sat down in that seat, right, I can see it from here, right next to Carl Levin, and we talked about what it meant. It was amazing. I was making that decision before an election, just a few weeks, but he was making that decision as chairman of the Armed Services Committee. That vote on his part took extraordinary courage, and history has shown that he was right. A Jewish publication in Detroit once wrote that Carl Levin and his brother, my pal, former Congressman Sandy Levin, both deserved what they called honorable mention awards, with the accent on mensch, for their historic service to America. I couldn't agree more. Loretta and I extend our deepest condolences to Sandy and the entire Levin family, especially Senator Levin's wife, Barbara, their children and grandchildren, and to their cousin Dan Levin, my pal, in Chicago, Illinois. I know how proud the Levin family was of their name and reputation. It was well earned in whatever they chose to do, law, politics, business. Carl Levin was a great man and a good friend. I will truly miss him.